Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Guillermo Christensen, and I'm a lawyer and partner with the law firm of K&L Gates in Washington, D.C. We're a large global law firm with offices around the world, with about 47 offices all told. On behalf of the Tortora Breda Institute, I would like to welcome you today to our hot topic event, The State of AI, Artificial Intelligence. Before we get into the topic, I would like to share a little bit about the Tortora Breda Institute, our session partner and our sponsor. The Institute was created to promote collaboration around public and private sectors with a focus on business, culture, and diversity. This happens to be a mission that I am also deeply supportive of, and I am, in fact, one of the board members of the Institute. Through our mission, we're looking to reshape and develop collaboration and partnering opportunities with a view to improving and securing business and global economies. A core concept of the Institute is our think tank for partnership excellence. This think tank has allowed us to bring together experts and leaders from the public and private sectors, from academia around the world, to reshape and develop collaboration and partnering opportunities and practices while trying to embrace some of the most critical energy and critical technology growth. Now, in this effort, we certainly invite as many people to support our work. And so if you're not currently a member of the Institute, we hope you'll visit the website to learn more about how you can join us and perhaps participate in this effort. I would also like to extend a special thank you to our sponsor for today's event, Gorilla Corporation. Gorilla Corporation is a leading global sales, marketing, and technology channel development company with a focus on serving the technology industry. And behind the scenes, when we're speaking today, there are a number of excellent people making sure that this thing runs well. And I'd especially like to thank Jill and Miguel, who are standing by in case we have any issues, which I hope will not be the case. At any rate, at this time, I'd like to go ahead and introduce our panel. And it is quite a distinguished panel, if I may say so myself. So I'm going to start with Brian Mazanek, Dr. Mazanek, PhD. He is currently with the Government Accountability Office, an organization that most of us in the technology field are well versed in, but it is one of the leading, and I think one of those special resources in the U.S. government that touches on a lot of issues related to technology, national security. Brian at GAO has led reviews of DoD, the Defense Department's efforts to adopt and integrate AI, and is going to be able to touch on things like the AI workforce issues that are uppermost, I think, in our concerns. Brian's work includes extensive academic research, including author of several books, The Evolution of Cyber War, for example. So I'm going to be leaning heavily on him to touch on some of these complex issues. Next up, Dr. Sagar Samtani. He is currently the assistant professor and Grant Thornton Scholar at the Kelley School of Business in Indiana, at Indiana University. Interestingly, he runs a research lab focused on AI-enabled cyber threat intelligence analytics. It's quite a mouthful, but this is really important stuff that deals with all of the issues around AI risk management, vulnerability management, and dark web analytics. So again, a wonderful resource for us to have on this team. Next up after that is Colonel Stoney Trent, PhD as well. So we've got a lot of PhDs on this panel. Former Army Intelligence and Cyber Warfare Officer. He established and directed the Experimentation Lab for U.S. Cyber Command. And he's currently a research professor at Virginia Tech and president of the Bulls Run Group, a human machine systems company, a very interesting concept. And then certainly not least, although I have put him last, is Michael Thiesmeyer, who along with me is one of the participants in our NAIC ISAL, and he will talk more about that. Michael is a wonderful collaborator on many, many things and is a distinguished security expert with, he claims, at least 2 decades. I think it's even more, so we'll be generous in his in assessing his age in cybersecurity and emergency technologies. He is a Silicon Valley CISO, so he faces the working level brunt of cybersecurity challenges, and is the CEO of Allied Cyber Partners as well. He has been involved in a lot of international efforts, which is an unusual area for cybersecurity experts, I think, still, since this is a relatively maturing discipline. He has worked on ISAO issues, the UN, and has been involved in over 40 international cybersecurity standards work. So an impressive background. So that's our panel, and you're going to get to hear a lot more from them in a few minutes. I just want to make a few kind of introductory remarks to set the stage. I think all of us in the cybersecurity field are thinking and expecting that artificial intelligence is somehow going to be a force multiplier in the cybersecurity ecosystem, and to some extent supplementing a lot of the operational efforts that are underway, helping the human beings to be more effective. At the same time, we also expect that AI is going to present new challenges because it works on both sides of the equation, the threat and the defense. So we're going to touch on those issues. We're going to touch on some of the guardrails that we think may be necessary to ensure that we're on the right path. But more than anything else, I hope we're going to discuss the public and private sector cooperation that is absolutely necessary for us to be able to bring AI into maturity and into successful integration in various efforts. So with that setting of the table, let me start by asking Michael if he would address kind of a broad and open-ended question, and then I'll have everyone else on the panel hit the same points. And that is, what is the current state of artificial intelligence in the United States and around the world? And where do you assess where things are right now?
Okay,
Mike,
wow,
please.
that's definitely a very, very broad question. I think all of us we're really excited about AI and how it's being, permeates through our lives, and all of the discoveries we hear about on a regular basis. So there's definitely huge opportunity for all of us. But the problem is that wherever there's great opportunity, there are also great risks. And I think when we're talking about where we are at the moment, and this is my view of what I can see, is one problem is we haven't been really good about mitigating the risks involved with AI, because we're still kind of developing all of these things. This is, we all know AI is very important, right? The annual threat assessment of the ODNI listed AI as one of the primary topics. The Special Competitive Studies Project, which was came after the National Security Commission of AI, lists AI as the #1 technology that will drive the future. But if we're looking at frameworks, regulations that are out there to kind of govern AI and ensure the responsible use thereof, and we'll talk about that later, we'll see that a lot of this is still in development, but we're already using it. It's already there, and we're rapidly increasing the use thereof. All of that then specifically concerns me, because another thing that was pointed out in this report by the Special Competitive Studies Project, and I actually lived through that, is we are in a phase of great power competition. And some of our adversaries are really, really good when it comes to doing so-called whole of nations approaches. I'm going to name China here. China has this concept of the 7 spheres of techno-influence or technology influence. One of them is setting the rules of the game, and that is standardization norms. And that's where I experienced it, the influence of that other nation. So I think we're a little bit behind, and we got to catch up on the frameworks, regulations, and standardization side.
Thanks, Michael. Stony, how about your perspective from maybe the DoD side and where you are now in the private sector on this question?
Yeah, I've looked at this quite a bit over the last 10 years, running technology assessments and technology programs for the Defense Department, and we've seen widespread change in home and business related work. Whether it's vehicle automation or content recommenders or business analytics. There's massive investments in industry and in the military being made for artificial intelligence systems. Unfortunately, these investments aren't always well informed. The success rates for technology startups in this space are very low. We have very poor transition rates from research programs into operational systems. And much of this can be attributed to your AI evangelists dominating the conversation and hiding AI shortcomings. AI is inherently just math. It's really complex software, and therefore we're prone to deploying very brittle models that are not understandable. The maintenance costs alone of deployed AI systems are unknown at this stage. These are costs for ensuring that your model is still performing accurately, and then employing the workforce to inspect and replace those models or retrain them when they're needed. So I kind of liken it much like Michael did to really the state of the internet in the early days, in which everybody was working on developing methods of transmitting information, and no one was thinking of how to protect that information. It took us 30 years to get here, as a cybersecurity enterprise and industry. And I think that it'll take a couple decades for us to get on the right track and overcome some of these very sort of narrow-minded perspectives and approaches to implementing AI.
Sagar, what's your sense from looking at this more from the research and academic side of things, including from the perspective of some of the things you see under the dark web surface that involves all of the threats out there?
Yeah, thanks, Guillermo, and thanks for moderating the session here as well. So a little bit of my perspective in terms of where we're at with AI today from a research point of view. I think one of the unique aspects of AI as a technology is that AI is being developed not just by industry, but also by academia as well. So if we take a look at a lot of the AI developments that have been coming out, they've been coming out thanks in large part to many academic institutions that are partnering very closely with industry like Meta and Microsoft and other organizations as well. So as such, there's a lot of proliferation of this technology that's coming out from not just from an industry point of view, but also from a research point of view as well. I'll touch on the manner in which this technology is being disseminated, which I think makes it very different from other types of information technology that we've seen over the past few decades. Is that it's very easy for me to actually go ahead and go to GitHub and download a few AI-related packages and start using that right away. And if we think about like startups that are trying to employ AI within their own organizations, what you'll find is that many of these organizations don't have the funds to actually go out and build or to buy AI software off the shelf. So they instead go to open source software offerings and then go ahead and pull in and fork and capture the types of software that they need to actually execute their processes. But what I'm seeing is that that's becoming more and more of an issue within the research space, within the startup space, and within the industry space as well, is the over-reliance on these open source software packages to actually execute AI-based analytics and many other types of AI as well. And what really the issue is that the open source software landscape is totally unregulated in terms of artificial intelligence in particular. Many of the conventional vulnerability assessment scanners that exist on the marketplace that scan for software vulnerabilities are not designed to scan for AI-specific vulnerabilities. So we're really letting the jungle loose, so to speak, in terms of the types of AI models that are out publicly accessible and allowing people to go ahead and download and use them for their own purposes. But then from the other point of view of not having any mechanisms to actually check the quality, the validity of these models, the security of these models. And I think that that's a significant issue. Now, in terms of the dark web angle, there's really not been too much discussion on the dark web side in terms of AI security as of yet. I anticipate that will change as time goes on, as these AI systems become more and more mission critical for many organizations. A lot of the chatter on the dark web is still around conventional security vulnerabilities, which don't translate one-to-one to the types of security issues that you see within the AI context. But I anticipate that with the proliferation of a lot of these AI models in an open source sense, that there's actually not going to be very much of a need for dark web kind of discussion. People can go ahead and just poison the well, so to speak, from the open source perspective there.
Excellent. Brian, from the perch of the GAO, which I think has a very broad set of responsibilities to look at a lot of these issues throughout the U.S. government. Where do you see the state of AI right now in the U.S., whether it be in the defense space, but also in the non-defense space, the research environment? Are we, how are we performing relative to others, especially?
Yeah, great question, Guillermo, and thanks to the Tortora Breda Institute and Carlo for the invitation to be here today. Happy to share GAO's perspectives on this. As you mentioned, we are seeing AI increasingly appear in really every context and issue that we look at across the government. What I'll talk about today is some of the work that we did focused on the national security enterprise, specifically DoD, and what they've done here. I'll also, I think, a little bit later in the conversation, talk about some of what GAO is doing to try to offer an accountability framework for agencies, organizations in the private sector to think about AI oversight and accountability, which is, as some of my colleagues in the panel have already kind of hit on, will be even for, I think, successful AI adoption at scale. But just quickly pivoting to sort of our perspectives on DoD, we issued a public version of a sensitive report in March that focused on DoD's efforts to date to adopt and integrate AI. And really, our focus in this work was at a very high level across the department, looking at what they're doing in terms of collaboration strategies, a broad inventory to prevent unnecessary duplication. Just a couple high-level observations from that work. I think, first of all, and this is probably not new to certainly to my fellow panelists here, but I think to many of the folks watching as well, AI is really not that new in some respects. And for DoD, they really have been dabbling in this since 1950s with DARPA and research into AI principles for various defense applications. The Navy, for example, established a Center for Applied Research in AI in 1981. So it's not necessarily new for the department, but they have really accelerated their efforts. In 2017, they established the Algorithmic Warfare Cross-Functional Team, which is more well-known as Project Maven, really to focus on some of those AI, ML applications with imagery and some of the IC applications, some human language technology applications. And then they stood up the JAKE, the Joint AI Center, with a $90 million budget up to, I think now it's just under $300 million. And then finally, the new Chief Digital and AI Officer, a CDAO function that's going to subsume the JAKE. So they're really accelerating their efforts. But when we looked closely at their strategies, their AI inventory collaboration, we definitely found areas they need to improve. I think we made a number of recommendations here to help with the inventory as an example. The real challenge here for DoD is that AI is not this weapon system, this program you just buy an AI thing. It's a capability embedded in other systems. So it's really hard to track and think strategically about in a big organization like DoD. And I think this lesson sort of cascades likely through other contexts as well. DoD did just recently settle on a single definition for AI in their DoD AI strategy, but even that was really hard, just defining what we're talking about here. And that led to a lot of issues we saw in their baseline inventory in April of last year. It didn't include a number of AI-related things that we learned about within the department, and they're working to improve that. And I'll talk a little bit later, too, about other aspects and observations from our work, but I'm really looking forward to the discussion today.
Thank you. That's so you brought up a good point there toward the end on cataloging of AI and coming up with a definition. And perhaps, Brian, you could talk us through how what DoD's definition looks like right now. But I would also like your thoughts on this and the rest of the panel. In the cybersecurity world, I think if you're not out there with a product offering these days that includes machine learning, AI, algorithmic, a lot of those catchwords, you're probably not going to get your Series A finance investments, right? I'm kidding, obviously, but the buzzwords are very important. Yet there's a serious issue here. Machine learning, artificial intelligence, some of the other kind of leading edge technologies all have a slightly different focus, but we use them often very interchangeably. And I think it tends to confuse some of the discussions. So Perhaps you could talk a little bit about those. What is AI versus machine learning versus some of the other elements of the technologies here, and I'd like to hear also from the other panelists on that, on your views on that, just so we set the baseline for our audience.
Yeah, that is a great question, Guillermo, and I'll actually sort of punt to my colleagues on the panel who I think have a little more of a technical background to maybe tease out some of the distinctions between AI and subcategories and ML and other things. And as I mentioned, DoD, while they've coalesced around a definition, they're still grappling with that challenge. The issues we saw were even more fundamental than that. Just because, in addition to a lack of a clear definition that would allow you to identify things, because it's a capability, it's hard to track in a large department like DoD. And we saw that with the inventory they were trying to assemble within the Joint AI Center, the JAIC, they were unable to, and they were trying to actually use AI, kind of interestingly, as a tools to cull through budget information and just incredible volumes of data in the department to identify AI efforts. But they had an inability to include efforts beyond some of the big acquisition programs. They weren't including operations and maintenance AI functions, for example. And that's something we've heard a lot about, how AI is not just big, like Terminator, Skynet kind of weapon systems, but it's stuff tied to the defense health system and logistics. It's really everywhere. And they also weren't really focused on classified areas, which of course with the Intel applications of AI is actually probably one of the more mature areas in the department. So we saw a number of weaknesses with their inventory, but I'll punt it to my colleagues to maybe talk more technically about some of the different categories within this area.
Stony, maybe you could pick up on that. And I know you wanted to touch on the JIC as well.
Yeah, I think it's fortuitous and ironic here that that you guys brought on the GAO reviewer of the organization that I planned and stood up. My role was to design and get the Joint AI Center off the ground, and I served for a couple of years as their chief of missions, my last assignment in the Army. And I really have appreciated all of the attention and accurate reporting from the GAO. Just throw that out there. Unsolicited kudos to my panelist partner here. Some of the biggest barriers that we're trying to address, and they're still trying to address, were not about model selection and training a model on a data set. They actually weren't the data science problems that many people think of when they think of AI. They were much more effortful. They were things like, gaining access to data repositories and curating that data, because the data has never been, was never envisioned to be used for meta-analyses and the development of an implementation of advanced analytics. Just socializing real problems that need to be solved with computer and data scientists in ways in which they can bring their expertise to bear is a big challenge. Government leaders don't really think about how to talk to a computer scientist about their problem, and so being able to to create a place where problem owners, data owners who are not necessarily the same, and technologists can come together and determine how to implement AI in real world settings. These are really big challenges. What we saw some of our biggest investments going to were just the development and refinement of infrastructure to accommodate. And so if you think about some of the commercial successes, that people like to point to, whether it's in the aviation industry, logistics, or in perhaps the internet search companies, they've spent 20 years building infrastructure and developing models based on user behaviors. And so this is really not a surprise that we would find slow progress in the world's largest bureaucracy. The challenge that I have personally experienced as an operator, analyst, and a technologist is that the conversation's often being driven by dazzling demonstrations and people that are bent on engineering out the humans in any settings. And these we've demonstrated for 40 years in human factors engineering research as wrong-headed approaches. That the humans are the source of resilience, and so we have to be able to retain agency by humans in these implementations, and so working towards that sort of vision with our AI experts in industry is a big challenge, and it's going to be a long journey.
Very interesting. Michael, picking up again the question, if you want to address it, how to differentiate between AI, machine learning, when we're having this discussion so that we're clear what we're talking about. But also, when we think about the way that AI is changing the way we do things and is going to change the way we do things, and picking up on Stoney's comments about the data sets issues, where do you see the state of play right now in how AI is impacting the cyber world, the defense world? But again, if you could also touch on this question of AI versus ML, et cetera.
Okay, well, I will give it my best. If any panelist wants to correct me, please speak up immediately. So AI, for me at least, it's kind of this greater concept of how a computer system emulates human behavior, task execution, and basically for problem solving. For me, ML is a subset of that, basically where a computer learns from, I'm going to call it the past, very simple, without having been explicitly programmed to do so. Any of my panelists want to correct that definition? All right, apparently it works.
No, you got it.
All right, perfect.
I'm happy if folks would like to read the definition from the National Defense Authorization Act. That's the best I could offer, but that's my legislative branch contribution. But I like yours better.
This is a PG-rated conversation, not
Well,
so Michael, how is AI changing the way we kind of see the world and the way we do things?
Wow, that's definitely a very broad question. How is it changing? Well, the question is really like you need to ask the other way around. What will AI eventually not change, right? I think across all sectors, and this was a point that actually the ODNI made, AI touches pretty much every industry sector, right? So it's not like it's sector by itself, but it's something that enables everything that we do. And based on that, all of our activities become information enabled and become more automated at a very, very simple level of description. The problem with that is, and I'm going to back to what our panelists said, is that we are sitting and we're aggregating more data. More and more data means more and more risks. Now, if you're a massive government entity, you might be able to protect yourself, but the problem is you're also now getting this trickle-down effect where AI is being used by other companies, by smaller companies. And when you're having small companies amass large data sets, then that of course comes with privacy risks, with real cybersecurity risk. And when we're coming at some point to the proliferation of AI, that's in biotech, it's more for the biotech industry. It's like this thing about proliferation of genetic editing. Proliferation of AI is, well, if you can start doing certain things from your own home, which we're already there, then what's the risk here from a terrorism perspective? What's the risk from a societal perspective? So I think we're seeing a rapid adoption. I think AI will change many things that we do. It will make us make better, more informed decision, process automation, RPA, cybersecurity. You talked about that. I think we'll go back to talk about it a little bit later. But the accumulation of data, I think, will be a risk that we need to tackle. And I'm very curious to see how we can go to those smaller shops or smaller businesses to enable them to protect that data that they're aggregating.
Got it. Sagar, any thoughts on Michael's excellent layout of where we are on AI right now?
Yeah, I think I'll circle back a little bit, Guillermo, to the definition of AI, differentiating it from machine learning here a little bit. And I agree with what Michael had discussed and what he'd outlined. I'm just going to go ahead and elaborate a little bit further on that as well. Concept of artificial intelligence has really been around for a very, very long time. And if we go back all the way to the 1600s, even to Aristotle and Plato and so on, in terms of thinking about how we can reason and how can agents actually reason within an environment. And then it really started to kind of take off around the time of Alan Turing's work back in the 1930s and 1940s in World War II with the Enigma machine and so on. And fundamentally, he asked the question, how can we train a computer to do what a human is good at, or emulate a set of human behaviors. And from that, Herbert Simon's work, Minsky, Newell, Judea Pearl, and others at Carnegie Mellon and so on started to actually build out different branches of artificial intelligence. And these could be things like reasoning, planning, knowledge representation, machine learning, and others. So where does machine learning kind of fall into that larger landscape? Well, machine learning is one of the major areas within the broader context of what artificial intelligence is. AI has gone through many ups and downs over the years. So there's been AI winters, there's been AI great times for AI, and inevitably after every large peak of excitement, there's a trough of disillusionment, for those of you that are familiar with the Gartner reports that come out. And right now, the way that AI has kind of moved over the last, since 2015, 2016, since the AlphaGo successes, is that it's really moved a lot more towards the machine learning aspect, wherein there's large quantities of data that have been collected from a variety of different sources, whether they be through the web, whether they be through sensors, whether they be through different types of transactional data and so on, that can then be used to actually train models, machine learning models, to actually learn from the data and make predictions about the future, or to be able to detect patterns within large quantities of data that were not readily apparent before. And that's where a lot of artificial intelligence has moved towards today, has been specifically within the machine learning space, and less so on the knowledge representation and reasoning and planning and so on, because people have realized that a lot of those types of AI, it's very difficult for them to get to human level intelligence, at least with the types of technologies that we have today. So hence, a lot of the push has been towards machine learning, and that's been compounded by the fact that computational power such as GPUs and cloud services have actually risen at a commensurate rate to the quantity of data that we're seeing today. So hence why there's been so much focus on the machine learning aspect. But what I want to draw attention to as well, and what's really getting a lot of attention in terms of artificial intelligence today, is a subset of machine learning that's really known as deep learning. And deep learning is the idea that you can actually train a model without having to handcraft the attributes or features or content within that data for the model to actually learn from. It can automatically learn the patterns from the data rather than you telling what kind of attributes or features are important for that model to learn from. And so as a result, things have become very powerful, such as image recognition, self-driving cars, reinforcement learning, and others. But that has also caused the proliferation of AI due to its success in those areas to be quite broad, leading to questions like, what is the type of data that we should be using for these AI models? I think China is a great example in terms of having to face those questions. How much data are they collecting about their citizens to actually train these AI models to do things like facial recognition, or maybe oppressing some of their own population because of the way that they're learning from the data that's being generated from their population? What's the role of using cyber breach data to actually train AI models? China doesn't have any rules against that. We do. We have some rules, and at least at best some ethical concerns that come into play. So when we consider some of the key cyber concerns as it pertains to AI has really become very synonymous with machine learning, more specifically deep learning, which is very data hungry, model specific. And the questions arise is that how do we manage the data? How do we use the data in a way that we can train models? And then what are the security concerns that are related to those models within the context of where they're being deployed and so on? So kind of just going down the line in terms of a definition of AI, going into the machine learning and deep learning part, and then some of the security aspects of that as well, particularly as it pertains to the data.
Fantastic overview. And you've teed us up for one of the main questions that we want to address today, and that is, with all of those possibilities, potentials, and risks, and you mentioned what's going on in China, what kind of frameworks do we currently have in place to regulate or oversee the deployment and development of AI, whether it's in the United States, in the European Union, or in other countries? What's out there right now that addresses these issues, and is it sufficient? And I'll open it up to please, Brian, maybe you want to start with that one.
Sure. Yeah. I happy to talk about from our work DoD's efforts in this area. But before I do that, I'd be remiss. I really wanted to highlight some work that GAO has done to facilitate others' efforts in this area, and by offering a framework that we issued in public. It's if you Google go to our website or just Google GAO AI Accountability Framework. You'll find it. We issued it in June of last year, but it's a pretty robust framework based on best practices. We convened, the head of GAO is the Comptroller General, convened a Comptroller General Forum with AI experts from across government, industry, nonprofits, and based on the results of that forum and some of our other work with our own in-house AI expertise, we developed this overarching framework that is useful for anyone really in any role of overseeing AI initiatives. It focuses on 4 specific complementary pillars or principles: data, governance, monitoring, and performance. And we have a series of really nested questions and things that can be done in each of those areas to really set up a productive accountability framework in any context at any sized organization to be able to ensure, for example, in the data piece, that the data is high quality, reliable, representative, to look at for bias, those kind of things. On the governance side, really having system level governance, organizational level governance, those kind of issues. So I wanted to mention that as a potential resource for folks who are interested. And then again, I'm happy to talk later too about our observations of DoD's efforts to set up a framework as well within the department.
Excellent. Michael, do you want to jump on the same question, but on the international side, what ISO, NATO, and the EU and UN are doing in these areas?
Sure. And for that purpose, I kind of want to open up the question a little bit. We say frameworks and regulations, but as we all have already seen, we're kind of a little bit behind here, and AI is a emerging technology, right? So one thing that comes in place with that is there's also communities of interest or expert communities. And that is very, very important to understand, because if you're sitting, for example, in the International Standards Organization, the same people that sit in there will in the end sit, or a lot of these people you will also meet when you're working with the Department of Commerce or with regulators. It's kind of like there's this cross-pollination of knowledge happening. And when something is still developing, understanding these networks of expert communities is really, really important. And that will be very important when I'm giving you kind of like my overview of this. So internationally speaking, you said it correctly. We have the UN, we have NATO, we have the EU, and we have the International Standards Organization. So the United Nations released a framework on kind of an agreement on the ethical use of AI. That was agreed to by 193 nation members. But of course, that's focused on ethics itself. We are not really talking here yet about actually dealing with like specific threats or with cybersecurity. NATO, I want to highlight kind of the Cyber Cooperative Defense Center of Excellence in Tallinn. They are hosting a yearly conference on cyber conflict. And this year, AI was very, very much a highly debated topic. And they released a numbers of studies and papers as a result of this conference. But most of that is very, very specific. We're talking about how to protect autonomous systems. So issues with data and attribution coming from highly AI-driven intrusion detection systems. Because when we're talking about defense, which is what NATO deals with, attribution is key, because there might be repercussions as the result of another nation state attack. So when AI goes into the decision-making process, there's a lot of like still mental legwork that needs to happen to ensure we're selecting the right response. And that is, again, where kind of the human turns into that fallback system, into that important second set of eyes on whatever determination was being made. When we're talking about the EU went and in April 2021, I think, released what was called the AI package. It was a set of guidelines, documents, and non-binding communiques, so to say. And thus covered the coordination among EU member states in order to ensure competitiveness. It included the need for a EU legal frameworks addressing kind of fundamental rights as it relates to AI, and also a liability framework. And it also outlined the need for the EU AI Act, which, if I correctly remember, is still in the works as of today. So you can already see there's a lot of work that's being done in the EU. They're trying to concert it across the member countries, but even that, it's just in progress. And the final thing is the International Standards Organization. This is where I have the most insight, of course, into, because I was part of the US national delegation to the ISO for quite some while. And in there, you have what's called Joint Technical Committee number 1, kind of does the global standards for all of technology. They have subcommittees. 27 is cybersecurity or information security. 42 is artificial intelligence. When you look at how many standards exist for one of these areas, you get also an indicator of maturity of the domain. So in subcommittee 42, we have 14, I'm not going to call them 14 standards, I'm going to call them 14 publications, and they're working on 25 more. When you look at those, what you will see is that the majority of those publications that are already released are actually about big data and not about AI. The reason for that is, surprise, surprise, subcommittee 42 used to be called big data and not AI. The only AI publications they have are very, very generic. It is all about establishing terminology and definitions. And then very recently, a AI framework was released, which kind of talks about the different components that go and flow into AI, but it's very high level. So not really much to find there yet. So, but then there's the big question, well, if we're already using it, we have to have something for cybersecurity, right? Well, that will be in the world of subcommittee 27. And lo and behold, there is one standard, but it is not published yet, and it was only registered as a work product exactly 2 weeks ago. So there's no ISO standard for AI cybersecurity. And based on how my experience, if they just registered it, so they're just an index item, it's probably going to take another 2 years at the bare minimum until the standard will be released. So there is nothing yet there in terms of guidance for security of AI.
Michael, what about the organization that I spent a couple of years at, and that's the OECD, which has done a lot of work on big data, on data sets, on privacy, the OECD privacy principles. Are they delving into the AI issues, and is there anything there that is helpful in this discussion?
I wish I could elaborate on that. My insight in the OECD is sadly not that big. I know the privacy principles, I know that, and I know there was actually, I think, a statement or an accord drafted a few years ago, but I don't remember the scope of that accord. Maybe somebody else has insight into the OECD? Negative?
No.
Well, I will make a mental note.
Yeah, I think maybe a topic for a future discussion. Yeah, because it's the OECD being kind of at the the crossroads of economic development and sort of the economic version of NATO. It's an interesting place. So let me take a slight detour here in the discussion, and let's talk about the question that's underpinning a lot of this, which is the public and private sector partnership in regulation of AI and where that's going. Do we have the right pieces in place for there to be a good discussion between the public and private sector on these issues right now? Do we need some other fora to be able to engage in these discussions? Thoughts? Anyone can jump on that one.
I don't pretend to be an expert on it, but I am generally skeptical in this space of regulations and standards from governments. Regulations and standards mean something if there's an organization to enforce them. And unfortunately, the vast majority of resources going to AI systems today are not coming through government-funded programs. They're coming through venture capital and other sources of revenue or capital. So to me, it's difficult to see how these regulations and even the organizations that we've talked about are almost unknown to the common person. Walk up and down the street and ask anybody what JTC 72 is. They won't have any idea how that should impact their purchase of a Tesla tomorrow. And so I think that if there's anything here, there should be more work towards establishing a dialogue between the sources of capital for commercial capabilities and sort of these governing bodies, or the bodies that feel they're governing, because without the buy-in from those sources of capital, there's very little hope for any of these standards to be implemented and impact any consumer.
Yeah, I would just pile on to what Stoney said in terms of, I think for the US in particular, and again, I'm coming at this from a national security lens, but with strategic competition and sort of the advantages that China has in terms of civil military fusion and being able to leverage, the US really needs to be able to better integrate and leverage the innovation that's happening in the private sector with industry. We saw that in a somewhat related report we just recently issued on space-based commercial remote sensing, where we did look as part of that review at analytics and saw that there really needs to be a better process within the National Reconnaissance Office, within the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, elsewhere within DoD and the IC to be able to scale these emerging capabilities. That whole valley of death discussion that we all hear about so much, there's really a need there because so much of the innovation is going to increasingly be outside of government. And for the US to really compete with an adversary like China over the next decade or more, it's going to really require figuring out how to do that better.
Thank you. Michael, let me turn back to you on this question of the public-private partnership, because one of those organizations that is, I think, well set up to lead the way on this is, of course, the National AI and Cybersecurity ISAL that you are the chair for. I'm one of the participants and members of it. But talk us through the concept behind an ISAL and the work that we have underway and that we're planning to do, and how that can help deal with some of the challenges we've been talking about.
Of course. Now, when we talk about an ISAO, Information Sharing Analysis Organization, you kind of have to understand that they're primarily cyber threat intelligence sharing organizations. So there's always cyber as part of this, I'm going to call it a mission scope. So when we talk about the purpose of an ISAO and why this exists, you have to also recognize the problems we have in cybersecurity. And in a lot of ways, the problems with cybersecurity and in AI are the same. The first thing we have is we have a workforce shortage. The professional defenders, when we talk about cybersecurity, can't be everywhere. So we focused our first round of defense kind of on critical infrastructure programs. Then supply chain attacks started happening. And we started to try to push the umbrella out as far as we can. But at the end of the day, we can only push the umbrella out that far. So that is where public and private partnership in general comes in. And this is right now a hot discussion, not only in the US, but kind of all over the world. I'm involved in a lot of the conversations in the Baltics and Eastern Europe. Everybody's kind of trying to figure out how to augment their, I'm going to call it cybersecurity defenders, and to help smaller businesses or help the industry punch a little bit above their weight line as it relates to that. Now, an ISAO was established by presidential executive order as an NGO type. I think it was 13691 under President Obama. And it really is about sharing cyber threat intelligence with related community of interest. Now, a few years ago, we held an event at TBI that was an AI World Cafe. And when we had our conversations, we figured out kind of that we all had the same concerns. We had the great power concerns. We talked about a lot of the risks that were happening. And we were kind of looking for, well, is there something out there that ensures that these communities of interest are informed about cyber threats that exist, particularly at the intersect of cybersecurity and AI. So either AI is a threat for cybersecurity or cybersecurity is a threat for AI. And we found there was nothing. And that was for some people really surprising. For some other people, we discussed today how we're kind of running behind and trying to catch up with everything was not as surprising. But that is kind of where an ISAO can step in and provide this guidance and intelligence and help also with better private and public sector cooperation. So an ISAO goes in fact actually beyond just pure cyber threat intelligence. It goes towards creating knowledge products. It goes now with the expanded orders from executive orders. It goes into cyber diplomacy because cyber threats don't have borders. So we can only really face this onslaught of cyber attacks that we're seeing. And this is a problem beyond AI, of course, with our partnerships with our allies, with likely-minded nations. So an ISAO is also a way how to kind of harden soft targets. And that is where we are spinning up these working groups for research, for public advocacy, for cyber diplomacy, and of course, the core product service threat intelligence. which is then shared across our members. And with that, we hope we help the overall national security posture of the United States and of its allies.
And I think I can speak for all the members of the ISAL that we encourage interested participants who may want to be part of this conversation and process to reach out, because we are very keen to be very broad-based and inclusive in the membership and who's involved. So let me, as we're winding out here on our time, I'd like to throw out one question, but also this is a question that you can take in any direction you like as closing comments. And I want to thank all of you for a very interesting conversation and for the time you've dedicated to this discussion. And what I'd like to ask you is, picking up on Michael's comments about the ISAO and the cyber AI piece, where do you see both the interconnect between AI and cybersecurity, and what do you see the future of that? But you're more than welcome to answer another question if you'd prefer in your closing comments. So let me start perhaps with Stony, if you'd lead the way with your Bulls Run charge.
Yeah, sure. And thanks a bunch here. I want to first just echo an earlier comment that I made. Artificial intelligence is really complex software. And so as a result, you're going to find failure modes that you will find in other software and information systems. And those failures are accumulating. You're getting marketing messages based on the successes. And those are making important progress. But the failures that we're seeing behind the scenes are stemming from mistrust and distrust in these systems that come from poor knowledge from within the developers and the consumers of those systems about how those AI systems should be performing, what their performance envelope is, if we think of them like we do an aircraft that has a performance envelope. These failures are slowly forcing conversations about technology trustworthiness. We're seeing this in not only cybersecurity workforces, where they're starting to wonder, well, is this AI-enabled system working today, and will it work tomorrow? But you're also seeing this in everyday consumers that are recognizing the need for what they don't understand it in this way, but they're recognizing the need for supervisory control of those models. These things we're using every day for content recommenders, and whether it's a cybersecurity product or a driver assist software application, we don't really know why it's working and when it's not working. I am frequently shutting off features in my highly automated car that I have no concept for why it's going off when it's going off. These consumer scrutinies are going to eventually, in the next 5 to 10 years, drive our technology industry, particularly in autonomous vehicles and cybersecurity spaces, to develop better feedback for consumers, but helping them understand risks that they're incurring by engaging in certain behaviors, helping them to understand when the system needs to be turned off or ignored, and helping them understand when it's best for them to pay attention and redirect resources within the system. So I'm excited about the future, but for different reasons than most of your evangelists out there that are busy selling wares that they fully don't understand. So I'm happy to engage in conversations outside of this with others, about these topics. Thanks so much.
Excellent. Brian?
Yeah, thank you. It's a great question. I think, and again, this is not something we weighed in directly in our recent work on the topic, but just thinking about it, stepping back a bit, I think the impact of AI on cyber security, offensive, defensive balance there is going to be less of a revolution. It's more, I think, of an evolution. It's not going to, I think, dramatically change the offensive, defensive paradigm. And a good example of that, of maybe where it will come into play, I think I saw just in the last couple of days, the new security chief at Microsoft commented about how he's viewing AI as really just it's going to be another avenue to be able to analyze data faster in this context to address shortage of personnel, security, cybersecurity staff. So it's going to be, I think, more of that iterative contribution over time. But just pivoting briefly, I think regardless of the application of AI, if it's for cyber or otherwise, it is going to be critical for the U.S. national security community to really get this right. We issued a report, we call it a national security snapshot, towards the end of last calendar year that really focused on strategic competition with China. And no surprise here, it's been mentioned, I think, a couple times, we focused in on how China views AI as really critical to its future military and industrial power and wants to be a global leader by 2030 in this area. So it's really important that DoD and the rest of the national security enterprise have accurate data and basic stuff that GAO focuses on, management stuff, complete information, the right strategies to be able to synchronize, deconflict, leverage industry, and compete with China in this space.
Excellent. Sagar, if you don't mind picking up on that, and then also we had a question from one of our LinkedIn participants about kind of resources that are available for those who are savvy but want to become more educated. I know we're going to post some good links on this discussion on LinkedIn, but if you have any thoughts on that, I think would be great for the audience.
Yeah, let me go ahead and actually lead off with answering that particular question, because my distinguished colleagues already talked quite extensively about kind of the future, and I agree with them, and I'll just supplement that if there's a little bit of time there. Let me actually go ahead and try and see if I can share my screen here for a minute. Okay, can you all see my screen? Okay, how about now?
There we go. Yeah.
Okay, so for those of you in the LinkedIn audience, go ahead and you can go ahead and take a screenshot of this particular screen here in terms of educational materials. And I'll go ahead and talk through it in terms of what this content actually is. So AI is a field that's rapidly evolving. There's no way that you're going to be able to kind of just stick on top of it and kind of be constantly aware of everything that's being developed out there. But I think that there's two things that are critically important. One is to kind of develop a foundational understanding of what modern AI is in terms of the statistical principles in the background and common approaches and so on, right? So building a good foundation for yourself. But then number two is how do you actually stay on top of AI developments as well? What I've gone ahead and compiled here for one of my classes and then also for some of the projects that I do is that what are the different types of tools or educational resources that are publicly accessible that you can go ahead and get into to stay on top of the AI development space. So in particular, what I've gone ahead and categorized this taxonomy into is that there's foundational AI conferences that are talking about fundamental AI theory and approaches and math behind AI development. There's more applied AI conferences that are actually taking the developments that have been made from those foundational AI conferences or developing certain types of domain-inspired AI applications. And then there's publicly accessible materials that folks that are in the technology space that are developing AI, maybe for more production context, are actually developing. So for instance, machine learning mastery is really good for being able to get some foundational level understanding and content related to AI. Different types of university level courses such as MOOCs and others are really good sources here. So in terms of educational materials, I think that this kind of provides a summary in terms of how you can kind of stay on top of AI developments over the long term and be kind of aware about what's coming up there. So I'll stop sharing the screen there. But I don't know if we have any more time, Guillermo, to talk about kind of the future of AI, or if that was a sufficient answer for our audience there.
I think that was excellent. And if you don't mind, if you can share that document after the webinar, I think Jill and Miguel can post that on the TBI website. That's an excellent document. I'm keen to have it myself. So let me do this. Let me give Michael the closing word. And but again, thank you all of you for an excellent panel. I think this has been fantastic, and to the Tortora Breda Institute for hosting us. This has been it's been a great conversation, and I hope we'll pick it up again, a phase 2, maybe with some additional things. But Michael, why don't you take it away from the perspective of the NAIC ISO?
Yes. Well, first off, thank you to the panel. Thank you to the moderator. Thank you for attending this event. I also want to say thank you to all of our viewers online. Like we discussed before, the ISAO is now officially open and looking for members. We're looking both for partners as well as for staffing our working groups and our executive advisory board. Really, we're trying to get as broad of a community together as possible, because I think that is what gives us, in the end, strength. So whether you're from academia, whether you're from a nonprofit, or whether you're industry, your voice is really needed in this type of conversation, because we can't get this wrong. I want to underscore this. We can't get AI wrong in our societies. The reason for that is that, like we said, AI is complex software. So lots of the challenges are the same as with normal software. The problem is we are bad when it comes to cybersecurity for normal software. And that's a problem when we're talking about these technologies that are black box technologies that, where you don't understand the output, and that really might affect fundamental core services for our societies that we rely on. So we must get this right. And I think through the ISAO, we are going to build a forum that, by virtue of our partners, of our members, will be able to guide the conversations both at a national as well as international level. And I always like to say, when it comes to the ISAO, currently the clay is still wet. There is a chance here to really have an impact and to be part of a lot of these conversations that happen when you are dealing with an emerging technology where still a lot needs to be figured out. So again, thank you so much.
Thank you, and have a good evening, everyone.